Hi. Hello?
Five Nights at Freddy's fans, theorists, speculators, we have been played. We are still being played by the grand architect, the designer of all of this. Everything we understand, all the lore we've collected together, the sheer hours of contradictory theories on this website, everything we know is a lie. And we're falling right into Scott Cawthon's hands. We have been lied to since the very beginning. Years ago, an indie game developer proposed a question to us. Is the truth we see in front of us the truth? Or is it a convenient dream to explain the horrors that have occurred? Years have passed with so much speculation. Whale trap versus mic trap, animatronic toes and fingers, color-coded eyes. But I'm here to propose to you something that is much more controversial. What if I told you the canon we understand is all wrong? Perhaps it never even happened. What if I told you that all of it, the missing children's incident, the bite of 87, the spring lock failures, the simulated pizzeria, the personal hell brought upon by vengeful spirits, none of it is true. At least, not as the games have told us. This video is an essay discussing the easily overlooked horror that is the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise at large. And at the end of it, I hope you as the viewer have a greater appreciation of this series and the evolution of its storytelling. On May 28th, 2019, Scott Cawthon and Steel Wool Studios released Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted for a variety of virtual reality devices. The game helped bring Five Nights from a viral craze that was dying down to a proper console title, with the production value to prove it. But in little more than a few paragraphs, Help Wanted completely recontextualized all of the previous games, and it did so in such a way, even to this day, I am unconvinced that the majority of this franchise's audience even comprehend the effects. Some may be wondering what that means, recontextualize. To put it simply, it means to change the context of something for whoever is viewing that work. For example, in music, sampling is to take a composition, be it a recording or simply the order in which the notes were played in one work, and placing them in a different work, changing what the arrangement might represent. The plant cinnamon is often used for its flavor in cooking, but in the world of dietary supplements, cinnamon is put into tablets or capsules. A plant used as seasoning has been recontextualized into something one might consider a vitamin. So you may or may not already know what Help Wanted has done to change the context of the original Fnaf games. A few sentences are all it takes to break a half-decade's worth of theory crafting and speculation. It comes in two parts. The first happens in the very beginning of the game.
We know that Fazbear Entertainment has developed something of a bad reputation over the last few decades, and while it's true that some stories associated with our name were loosely based on actual events, the majority of them were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic, lawsuits pending. But we aren't above laughing at ourselves. Ha ha ha. That's why we have recreated many of these completely fictitious scenarios, lies that you've been fed over the last several years, into a hilarious VR game, in the hopes that we can finally move past these childish ghost stories and develop a new relationship with you, as well as your kids. Don't forget the merch, perfect for birthdays. So sit back and enjoy a few scares.
The opening crawl goes through great lengths to word parts of this almost meticulously, while peppering in financially motivated comments for humor. However, these corporate quips are intentional distractions from the information here that is actually important. Within the context of the previous Five Nights at Freddy's games, Fazbear Entertainment is constantly portrayed as a corrupt, inconsistent, and cheap business that takes every chance it gets to cut corners and cover up any bad press. On the one hand, they would have multiple instances of missing children that they would simply ignore while using notoriously dangerous spring-lock suits to cut costs in their businesses. But on the other hand, they would have enough money to fund a licensed TV show for the brand, as well as develop and utilize advanced new robots with facial recognition software for security reasons. But with the context of Help Wanted, is this representation of Fazbear Entertainment correct? I want you to remember the use of specific wording here. They say that their reputation has become bad over the last few decades, but they seem to only focus on the last several years, presumably the years that the Five Nights at Freddy's games have been out. Why not anything further? If their reputation had been soured over decades, why hadn't they taken this opportunity to make light and make fun of whatever old controversy they've dealt with too? One could argue that the recent surge in the Fnaf games had brought back to light the old controversy, but I'd like to suggest an alternative possibility. Perhaps the Fnaf games are there to conceal the old controversy, purposefully hiding the truth. A series of confusing, convenient lies. In the plot for Help Wanted, the player is meant to collect a series of glitched tapes, recordings of a programmer who worked on the game during its development. These games, more specifically Tape 13, is the other half of this recontextualization.
They lied to us. They lied to all of us. They told us that the whole point of this VR game was to undo the bad PR done by a rogue indie game developer who supposedly made up a bunch of crazy stories that tarnished the brand. But that's not true at all. In their haste to develop this VR game and clear their name, they sent us some things I don't think they intended us to see, such as a hard drive containing emails between Fazbear Entertainment and a certain indie developer. Fazbear Entertainment hired the game developer. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up, a campaign to discredit everything.
This tape, along with the beginning of the game, established a canon fact for the overall Five Nights at Freddy's lore. The Five Nights at Freddy's games were made to cover up what actually happened. The Scott stand-in isn't there to simply explain why certain animatronics are in Fnaf VR, or to soft reboot the franchise. The rogue indie game developer exists to create a false history for Fazbear Entertainment. One that could pollute the public consciousness and shift people's perception of events away from what actually happened and to a curated and edited version of whatever the company wants. Ask yourself a question: how would a person in 2014 or 2021 get informed about current events? Back in the 80s and 90s, when many of these games are set, information, especially about current events, had to be watched on the news or read in newspapers. If something wasn't being covered, you wouldn't hear about it. But the last decade has been a historical oasis of information access. Smartphones, tablets, computers, and laptops, smart TVs, game systems, all connected to the internet, all showing search results for whatever you've typed into them. Information, both good and bad, could spread quickly. Things can go viral, reaching millions within a short period of time. And what, for a fact, do we know has gone viral?
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to...
On August 12, 2014, popular YouTuber Mark Fisbach, known as Markiplier, uploaded a YouTube video titled Warning, Scariest Game in Years, Five Nights at Freddy's, Part 1, in which he plays a new indie horror game about a rundown Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. His video got millions of views and is one of the videos that started the Five Nights craze on YouTube.com. The The Five Nights at Freddy's phenomenon was huge, YouTube channels popping into existence to thrive off of its popularity, entire communities materializing from thin air just to speculate over what the game's story was actually trying to tell, and seemingly, out of the blue, faster than anyone could anticipate, sequel after sequel were birthed into the world, each one more startling and convoluted than the last. Characters being redesigned between titles with little explanation for the changes. Every new game is filled with secret minigames and Easter eggs if just to create more confusion. Springlock suits have 5 fingers, but Fredbear only has 4. Is the child having a nightmare, or is he really being tormented by demons in the night? Bite of 87 or Bite of 83? Why is Toy Chica's beak missing? Why is Golden Freddy's hat black? Purple guy and pink guy? This stuff went on and continues to go on. And that's the point. That's what Fazbear Entertainment wanted in the first place. I propose this interpretation. Fnaf Help Wanted, Special Delivery, and soon-to-be-seen Security Breach all take place in a world just like ours. But in that world, Fazbear Entertainment is a real entity that used to operate in the 80s and 90s. And using the popularity of online content creators like YouTubers, they sought to mask their dark past by manufacturing fictional depictions of their business, in turn making it incredibly difficult to find truthful information about their brand's seedy past, as well as using the viral interest in Freddy's as a means to achieve a further, more insidious goal. What might that goal be, we'll address later. Viewing the series both retrospectively and going forward through this lens allows for many discrepancies to be clarified or justified. Why is it so difficult to know when these games take place? The first game's nights end with a week's paycheck that has the year redacted. The only way anyone is able to speculate is by doing math to compare this check to various minimum wages through the last few decades. Yet, in the next game, the year is clearly listed as 1987, which would have to make it a prequel to the first if the estimated year for that was correct. All through that second game are things that become more and more inconsistent as time goes on. The number of animatronics more than doubles, with some being shadowy phantoms or simply robotic skeletons with non-existent backstories. In the back room of FNAF 2's location, there are broken down animatronics that are claimed to be the ones from the first game, yet they look notably different. Their builds and skeletons seem to be dramatically different. All of these things require great leaps in logic and dramatic speculation to make sense of in that context. But if viewed through the lens that these games are made to be intentionally confusing and misleading, these things are much more simple to pin down. The years are not simply stated because Fazbear Entertainment wants the players and speculators to spend time focusing on that. The increasing number of animatronics in each game exists as a puzzle to be solved, deep dives to be dug, further and further down by the most obsessive members of their new fandom. Not because there's a lore mystery to solve or narrative children to avenge, but instead to create a cultural relevance and fanaticism around their brand. A fictional mystery fabricated by Fazbear Entertainment to captivate an incredibly young audience, one who has no point of reference, a very impressionable fan base who have been manipulated from the hands of YouTube personalities and social media influencers into the grips of the beast. The word honeypot can mean something that is appealing or attractive, but in a certain context, it means something that exists to lure individuals in, enticing them. Five Nights at Freddy's through the lens of the first 6 games is a complicated story of tragedy, revenge, and the destruction of 2 families in the ruins of a defunct pizzeria. It could be interpreted as the evil of one man's desire to obtain immortality and the redemption and vengeance of innocent victims. But through the lens of Help Wanted, the FNAF series at large is a honeypot. In the same way that the purple guy lures his victims into his evil acts at the promise of leading them to puppies or to a surprise. The games at large exist to lure in young players and viewers. They exist to draw in people into their brand, to ingrain these animatronic characters into their minds. The games being an avenue for Fazbear Entertainment to do the one thing that we know they do already: affect the minds of their audience. The player reveals the narrative of Help Wanted through collecting the glitched tapes, each one revealing a bit more perspective from someone we collectively refer to as Tape Girl. She was an employee for Silver Parasol Games, who are the initial developers of the Freddy Fazbear experience. Tape Girl was part of the quality assurance team, beta testing and running through the game during its development. The story goes, the client of Silver Parasol Games, that being Fazbear Entertainment, brought them strange hardware to use to expedite the process of developing the game. Tape Girl says her company was told to scan old circuit boards, ones that had code that seemed to take hold and cause an anomalous character to begin appearing in the game. Not long after these events, the mental condition of her co-worker Jeremy went downhill, leading to him dying a gruesome death and the studio being bought out soon after. The mysterious nature of Tape Girl's disordered tapes and the looming threat of this digital assailant are enough to fill a standalone story, but that story seems to overlook one thing. Fazbear Entertainment laid out these events too. The introduction of old circuit boards with malicious code, the orchestration of the buyout of Silver Parasol Games once things started going downhill for employees. But these actions don't seem to be ones by an inept, washed-up pizza chain. They seem deliberate. They seem intentional. Even when viewing the dialogue spoken by the game's narrator, it seems as if Fazbear Entertainment are aware of the malicious software, Glitchtrap, being present in the game. They even make the player sign a waiver in the beginning for the very same virtual mind consciousness transference that is present in Glitchtrap's inclusion in the game. If Fazbear Entertainment was an inept, stupid company doing things to make a profit, they could have easily ignored the killer malware embedded in the recesses of their game. Collecting all of the tapes isn't a simple feat, as the collectibles in the game put the player through some of the more difficult challenges the game has to offer. But again, the impression that Fazbear Entertainment is a cheap, lazy company is an impression they themselves have created. Any suffering or trauma caused in association with them is always caused by their ineptitude or inability to act according to them. They vicariously created an entire game series that implies they are incapable of committing acts of evil intentionally. And in the process of doing so, they've created a fan base of detectives who scour any game attached to the franchise for secrets that may help unravel the mystery they themselves have manufactured. Every Five Nights at Freddy's game has Easter eggs, secrets, minigames, and extreme challenges, all of them operating under the implicit expectation that there is something more sinister underneath, a dark truth hidden behind the most completionist of challenges. One of the games literally has a locked chest that can't be opened, existing only to tease the player of the mystery's resolution being close, but just barely out of reach. After 8 games of completing 2020 modes and hidden minigames, their fanbase have been trained to throw themselves at any potential lead towards the mystery to be solved, all leading up to Help Wanted, a game with a literal body-snatching virus as its greatest trophy. If Fazbear Entertainment is a stupid, cheap company, then Help Wanted is a shameless cash grab holding a dark secret underneath, an accidental body snatcher hidden in the files of a game made to profit off of their bad press. But if Fazbear Entertainment was the one arranging all of this, then Help Wanted is the most nefarious honeypot, a game using all of the imagery that they have made you familiar with over the last few years, hinting multiple times that there's a digital consciousness inside the game. The title gently coaching the players who have been primed to search for secrets all these years, all leading to the player finding what they're looking for, only to be overridden or swapped by whatever viral presence Fazbear Entertainment ensured would be implanted into the game. This interpretation is impossible to move away from, because at their own admittance, everything we know about Fazbear Entertainment is information they themselves have curated. Outside of what those original games tell us, we literally don't know what Fazbear Entertainment's motives or desires are. We don't know what they've done, because everyone viewing this series only has these fabricated games to work from. We don't know what businesses they really had in the 80s or 90s. We don't know when they were open and what possibly could have happened in those businesses. We don't even know what the animatronics they used actually were. All of the animatronics that we see in Help Wanted are used in the indie games they commissioned. It's a likely possibility that we don't even know what Freddy Fazbear actually looks like. On November 25th, 2019, augmented reality game developers Illumix released Five Nights at Freddy's AR Special Delivery for iOS and Android devices. The game is similar to Pokemon Go in that it uses the phone's GPS signal and location data to pit animatronic enemies against the player. But in the context of the game, it isn't a game at all. Special Delivery states that Fazbear Entertainment has created a new service, the Fazbear Funtime service, allowing members of the public to order animatronics to their homes. The app itself would exist in-universe, probably under a different name in the same way that Fnaf VR has a different name in-universe, and operates as both the means of tracking your animatronic delivery, akin to tracking an Amazon Prime package, as well as managing the animatronics you are able to fend off. But ever since the game released, the fan base has continued to ask one question: is Special Delivery canon? Now, I understand why some would feel this way, as there are many animatronic inclusions that don't seem to make much sense. Some animatronics seem to be strange choices to be delivered to anyone, intentionally or not. Circus Baby and Ballora, for example, within the context of Sister Location, are animatronics that would have been owned and created by Afton Robotics. They would be strange characters to include. If all the animatronics in Special Delivery are recreations, they would basically amount to being counterfeit robots. To an even further extent, Springtrap, a character that has been explicitly stated to be a child killer bound to the physical world in undeath, they would be a strange character and difficult animatronic to both replicate and justify as a choice. Springtrap has literal human remains littered underneath their rotted animatronic casing. The inclusion of these, as well as of all of the alternative costumes in the game, make it incredibly difficult to argue that these characters would be present here. If they ever existed in the way that the games originally said they did, there would be no appeal in their inclusion, both in random appearances and in the in-game catalog. In a world where William Afton kills over a dozen kids only to be a zombified robot rabbit and be hidden away for decades, there wouldn't even be an opportunity for Fazbear Entertainment to use the character in the first place. But remember, Help Wanted established that reality, at least in regards to the game's universe, is one where Fazbear Entertainment created those stories themselves. We don't know if Afton Robotics even exists, and to what capacity it could. According to the narrative given in that game, Circus Baby, Ballora, Springtrap, Mangle, every character we've seen up to this point are all fictitious or partially fictions. As far as Special Delivery is concerned, in this interpretation, these characters aren't from the real Freddy Fazbear's Pizza or Circus Baby's Pizza World or even Fazbear's Fright. They're animatronic replications of the game characters, of the familiar game characters that we spent 6 years seeing over and over again. In the same way that Help Wanted uses these characters to get closer to you in your mind, Special Delivery uses the same characters they manufactured, both figuratively and literally, to physically get into your house. To achieve this, they even went out of their way to use the same YouTuber that helped popularize the games in the first place. While he goes unnamed, Markiplier literally tries to sell you the service in the trailer, And while one could read that as simple fan service, there is a real possibility that Fazbear Entertainment was the one who hired Markiplier in the first place. A hired stooge to play the games and sell the Fazbear name to a public that collectively forgot about them, either intentionally or through information suppression that Fazbear Entertainment enacted. An extravagant honeypot in the form of a service Fnaf fans couldn't resist. When reading the novels, using this interpretation gives a lot more credence to the events that happen in them. The Fazbear Frights series of books seem to take place in a time where PlayStations and YouTube exist, where people make VR fan games about Springtrap, and where animatronic characters are seen in scenarios that wouldn't make sense in the games. Chica appearing outside of a girl's house every night to take the spirit of her dead sister away, or Ballora apparating to a purse thief whenever they put on a pair of glasses. Concepts like possession and remnant are brought up and discussed, which leaves the possibility that the version of history Fazbear Entertainment proposed to us isn't entirely fabricated. Yet it is different enough from the original game's setting to make it seem like a completely different beast. The recent games and Fazbear Fright books describe a world where Fazbear Entertainment have re-entered the public consciousness. There are both old things tied to the brand's history, like a vintage Ella doll popping up, as well as new things that don't meld with the setting of the games. People visiting open Freddy Fazbear Pizza and Games, open Circus Baby Pizza World businesses in present day. This doesn't align with the game's portrayal of a tragedy-filled series of buildings being shut down, but fits perfectly in a narrative in which Fazbear Entertainment uses the popularity of the games and novels to open up locations again. Some locations even use characters specifically from the games, like Freddy's Pizza and Games using Shadow Bonnie in one of their on-site attractions. There is even young characters who actively try to buy Fnaf merchandise and toys. One story centering around Oscar, who wants to buy a plush trap toy that works just like the character does in the game. This is a world in which Fazbear Entertainment is scheming in the background as the fallout of some of their actions seem to operate on their own accord. The Stitch Wraith, or the number of spirits haunting and possessing things in these stories. There's even a story where a man gives birth to a miniature Springtrap. The Fnaf novel trilogy seems to be different from this. If we go back to the peculiar wording of the Handy Unit intro narration, they seem to describe the offensive fabrications, lies, not as games, but stories. One could interpret this vagueness as an intentional tongue-in-cheek description of the in-universe indie games and their story, but I think it's more plausible to suggest that when Handy Unit says stories, they mean the collective combined stories of both the Fnaf games, the Fnaf novel trilogy, and their extended book spin-offs like the Security Logbook or the Freddy Files. Similar to the original games, the novel trilogy describes an equally distant time period to the games, this time in the middle of the 90s. On the surface, setting this book in 1995 lines it up with the rough estimation of when the original games took place, giving these books the appearance of an alternate telling of the story in these games. However, it's very possible that this could have been done to distance the events just far enough back to eliminate the possibility that someone in the target demographic of children roughly between the ages of 9 and 20 to be able to remember anything about Freddy's when it operated back then. I personally would have been 2 or 3 years old in 1995, sliding me directly in the camp of someone who wasn't old enough to remember. The characters in the books often parallel unnamed figures from the games, with some characters being name-dropped in the books before they even appeared in the games properly. The novels were the first named appearance of the Fnaf big bad evil guy, William Afton, a borderline cartoonish villain whose motivation for committing such cut-and-dry evil acts stem purely from a goal so selfish he might compare to Saturday morning anime antagonists. While not a one-dimensional villain, Afton perfectly encapsulates the repeated theme of the Fnaf games and novels, of human life being forced into a robotic shell for a cruel purpose, a literal ghost in the machine. This repeated theme exists in all of the games, being stuffed into a spare animatronic suit, the Purple Man being trapped inside of a rabbit-shaped prison, young children being swallowed up by the robotic monsters in the closet, rental robots snatching children while they're away, a synthetic pizzeria being used to trap a host of evil spirits. All of these are instances of this scenario being repeated, reinforced. In turn, the novels act as a complementary material for the games, and an additional Fazbear branded fiction to be combed through for clues to a mystery that has no true answer. If aligned, but not combined, the original games and the novel trilogy tell a palatable story of tragedy and justice, victims eventually finding peace. The unequivocally evil William Afton finding a poetic end by his search for eternal life ending in an eternity of torment by the ghosts of his crimes. But in addition to that, they are tacked onto the list of child and teen accessible Fazbear merchandise. Merchandise that is plentiful. Viewing the Five Nights at Freddy's horror franchise through this lens, the actions of Fazbear Entertainment appear to be a deliberate scheme, using the manufactured mystery of their franchise to lure in young millennials and Generation Z youth. They can infiltrate the minds of very impressionable young people, and in doing so, they can seemingly fulfill any number of dramatically evil plans. Using their VR experience, they can infect or outright steal the bodies of players with the evil software they've intentionally planted. The AR game/animatronic delivery service app allows Fazbear Entertainment to send machines with software copied from the same dubious circuit boards directly to people's homes. The delivered animatronics all boasting uncharacteristically bright glowing eyes, almost as if to beam something into your mind in the same way that a VR headset might. And if following that trend, all of the other merchandise could also boast a similar risk. Without any warning, it's possible any other piece of merchandise could be a ticking time bomb. Every Funko Pop, every jump scare plushie, every Fnaf replica mask, all of them could be soul-stealing, body-swapping, brainwashing machines, and none of us would know to expect it. If you were to believe the games, people always, or almost always, get stuffed inside the machine. But what if this entire time, Fazbear Entertainment had planned to stuff the machine into people, wipe the minds of an entire generation, fill them with an artificial consciousness, giving them unseen control over the populace? I know the trailers for Security Breach established that Vanny will be there, but who's to say that there aren't hundreds, thousands of people just like Vanny out there waiting, ready to strike? Writing this essay, it became incredibly apparent how Fnaf seemed to grow in scope and size as time went on. Interpreting this series this way gives the franchise at large an almost ARG-style presence, an ARG being an alternate reality game. Some elements of Fnaf already transcended the mediums that they started in. Puzzles set in a game would need clues from a book to solve, names from a crossword puzzle looping back around into describing characters in the games. But for a small time, it seemed Scott Cawthon wanted to more explicitly blur those lines. During the development of Five Nights at Freddy's VR Help Wanted, Scott admits that he wanted to make a mock website for Silver Parasol Games, the studio within the Fnaf universe that Tape Girl worked for before it got bought out. He had a logo created and had plans to make an entire website, but he decided against doing so. In a Reddit post that Scott made last year, he had this to say on that topic, and I quote, "At the time, I had plans to even go as far as making a whole website for them, but then decided against it. After all, there is a fine line between crafting an in-game story and just outwardly lying about something. I didn't want to cross that line. I decided against creating a website, but decided to leave the logo in the game since it was in-game after all." Scott said himself that he didn't want to cross that line, and thinking further on it, one can understand why. On the one hand, inventing a fake game studio to be credited in your new game and leaving a footprint for them in the real world might obfuscate the actual people who worked on the game. But on the other hand, placing that fictional studio in the real world places more of the events of the games into the real world. Jeremy, the quality assurance member who cut his own face off, would be on their payroll. It would blur the lines between what's obviously a story and what's being propped up as real. Scott, as a writer and as a parent, understands how important it is to make a distinction between what's real and what's pretend. If Silver Parasol Games is real, then is Fazbear Entertainment real? Is Freddy Fazbear real? Did any of that awful stuff really happen? Is there a chance that those awful things could happen to someone right now? These are real concerns that a child could have if the lines were truly blurred. In addition to that, Five Nights at Freddy's being a horror series allows adolescents who actively seek dark and gory subject matter to gain enjoyment from its themes, not unlike characters from numerous creepypasta. But Fnaf had the added benefit of being explicitly fictional, while many creepypasta operate as implicitly fictional stories. Slender Man is fictional, but its story operates under the admittance that it's a being rumored to exist. Rare photos document glimpses of it and its victims before it whisks them away. If those lines were blurred, then there would be less in place to prevent a child or a teen from convincing themselves that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza or any of the events of these games were real. Dealing with a game where there seems to be a number of child killer-obsessed brainwashing victims, it seems like establishing a firm boundary is key in preventing some misguided teenager from reenacting the Slender Man killings in the name of Glitchtrap or something along those lines. So in turn, Scott leaves a lot of things ambiguous for the benefit of the audience. While less narratively effective, one can interpret the rogue indie game developers' games as simply games analogous to the ones we've seen in real life. Markiplier goes unnamed in the special delivery trailer to allow it to be read as simply a fun, tongue-in-cheek experience, laying out breadcrumbs to the next thrill in hopes they were along for the ride. Scott never outright squashes central pieces of fan speculation, never telling anyone if they're right or wrong. He knows the kind of game he's made to this day, and he's dedicated to ensuring as many people get to enjoy it as possible. No one's theory is wrong, and we're all here to have a good time. In the final statements of this essay, I'd like to take us back to 2015. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 had just released, and despite it having a gameplay loop where there was only one animatronic, everyone around knew that as far as I was concerned, it was the scariest game to date. Even after Sister Location and Ultimate Custom Night released, I still felt that Fnaf 3 was the scariest. Not for its jump scares or for its atmosphere, but because of, in terms of horror, it was the game that filled me with the most dread. In the horror genre, there are a few different kinds of fear. Horror itself is the apprehension at the sight of something, witnessing that something that made the horror happen. Terror is the apprehension and anticipation of something, such as looking into the vent camera and seeing a shambling figure crawl ever closer. Dread is the anticipation of that horror, the uncomfortable expectation of that terror. Dread is knowing that if you're caught, you'd be stuffed into a costume and killed. But Fnaf 3 changed that from the first two games in a way that unsettled me. I knew what would happen to me if those child-possessed animatronics caught me. But for everything I knew, all the puzzles my newly graduated college mind had solved, I had no idea what Springtrap would do to me if he caught me. As I'd look down the vents and see him crawling closer, I would scramble to defend myself, but in the pit of my stomach I would feel that dread coming over, the dread of being confronted by a predator I didn't understand. In present day, I don't feel the same way anymore, and that's because of this newfound interpretation games like Help Wanted and Special Delivery have given me access to. Since then, Help Wanted has become the scariest game for me. Not because of the evil malware hidden in the files or the blacklight challenges or anything so simple. Help Wanted as a work of horror media scares me because it allows you to properly view Fazbear Entertainment as the real villains for the first time. Villains who have created a rabid fan base from people too young to remember the crimes they committed. It allows an interpretation that is so manipulative to the people meant to experience it, we can't even know what caused them to have the bad reputation in the first place. Five Nights at Freddy's VR, Help Wanted, is a masterpiece of horror storytelling because it says that Fazbear Entertainment's crimes are so horrific, so absolutely terrifying, that they can lie and say they were complicit in the deaths and disappearances of children. They can lie, and that lie won't be as bad as the truth. It is the scariest FNAF game to me because they've done something worse than letting children die. And we, the audience, will never know.